There's a drive way back. It might be. It could be. It is. Holy cow. Welcome to another broadcast of Bricks Behind the Ivy.
Hey, Cub fans, welcome to another episode of Bricks Behind the Ivy. I am your hostess, the mostest, Jeff Candy Cubs Rogowskis, and we had a mixed bag of a week. Always love returning to Cleveland. It's where it happened. It's where we did the thing on a Wednesday. But not as good memories there this time. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you've been watching for a while, make sure you hit that subscribe button. If you're listening to this podcast, make sure that you review the podcast so that we can continue to grow Bricks Behind the Ivy. So, as always, our first segment today is the Box Score Blitz, where we go over the last week of Cub games since our last episode and try to figure out who's hot, who's not, and the direction the team is going. So, without further ado, let's start the Box Score Blitz. And I promise, if you watched last week, I will not pretend to sing Take Me Out to the Ball Game today. Guys, 3, 2, 1, take me out to the... Sorry, I do not want your ears to bleed, but if you are from the Chicago Cubs and you're listening to this, that is my informal audition tape to lead the 7th-inning stretch. So, hit up your boy. But, without further ado, the Box Score Blitz. 3, 2, 1. Go. So the Cubs had a little bit of an uneven week. They only played 5 games because they had an interesting situation in which the rivalry games are a 2 away and 2 home set. So they had their 2 at US Cellular, guaranteed rate. Comiskey, whatever you want to call it. They had their 2 versus the White Sox and then had an off day on Sunday. Super weird. I didn't even know what to do with myself without baseball on Sunday. What did you guys do? Leave some notes in the comments on what you guys ended up doing with your Sunday. Anywho, the Cubs took both games in the Crosstown Cup. We won the BP Cup. Whoop-de-doo. Is the BP Cup a thing? I don't think so. I don't know. I don't care. I don't know if anyone cares. But yeah, Cubs take both games from the White Sox. That first game got a little bit scary as they went up big early and ended up winning by 1 run. And the second game, the Cubs also won. So off to Cleveland to visit the place where it happened. What was that thing that happened?
Done it before. Here's the 0-1. This is going to be a tough play. Bryant, the Cubs winning the World Series. Bryant makes the play. It's over, and the Cubs have finally won it all.
Anywho, the Cubs lose all 3 of these games. The first game, they got ahead, and there was a very controversial call on Shota Imanaga that ended up turning into a bunch of runs, and the Cubs came all the way back just to lose 8-7. They saw a lot of Emmanuel Clase, who was rumored as a Cubs target this offseason and is a pretty dominant closer. He throws really hard, has a really good cutter. Cubs could not figure him out, lose these games. They scored 10 runs in this series and only 1 in the last 2 games. 1 run's not going to cut it. They lose all 3, and yeah, it was kind of a weird situation. They didn't really walk, they didn't strike out, but they were 2 for 18 with runners in scoring position, which in a 3-game set, that's not a lot of opportunities. So they really weren't generating a lot of opportunities to score runs. But they weren't striking out a lot, and they weren't walking, so there just wasn't a lot of traffic. So it's hard to score runs when you do that. It puts a lot of pressure on the pitchers. So who was hot this week? Well, our player of the week is Ian Happ Daddy Happ. He had 2 home runs, 3 RBIs, and 196 weighted runs created. Plus, his strikeout rate is a little high, almost at 40%, but we'll take that production. And a happy belated birthday to Mr. Ian Happ. And the pitcher of the week, look no further than the man of steel, Justin Steele. He had 6 innings pitched. K's versus the White Sox. He's looking like that number 1 the Cubs have always wanted. Love that he's from the left side. It was National Lefty Day this week. Had a moment to think about one of my favorite lefties, John Lester. Still the man. And that is the box score blitz. So let's set the scene. The Cubs are sitting still a little bit out of the playoff range, and by a little bit, it's kind of a lot of bit. The Cubs were approaching 500 going into this series this past week, but losing all three in Cleveland did not help their case. They really needed to take at least one there, but it didn't end up happening. They were not great games. The offense did not look good. And, it was pretty frustrating. The Cubs are now 6 games back in the wild card after kind of closing the gap to 3.5 with their win streak last week, and they've lost 3 in a row. They welcome the Blue Jays this weekend, followed by the Tigers, which both teams are under 500. So hopefully the Cubs can, generate some home cooking and win some games. And it'll be the homecoming of Javier Baez to Wrigley Field as a Tiger. So kind of exciting to see that. Javi obviously is not the same player as he was, but really loved him in his time with the Cubs. So in a quick standings update, the Brewers still remain in first place. Cincinnati Reds got pretty hot this week, swept the Cardinals, and are now tied for second in division, both at 60 and 61. Cubs just behind them at 59 and 63, and the Pittsburgh Pirates have lost 10 in a row and are now 56 and 64. So the Cubs are 6 games back in the wild card, and there is a opportunity here to kind of stack up some wins as the Cubs are playing a lower class of team over the next few weeks. So how do they do that? Well, I'm going to tell you how. Here are the 3 things the Cubs need to do to make the playoffs in 2024. Number 1. Well, the Cubs really need to hit. And they need to hit for slug. They had 2 starts this week, one versus Alex Cobb, who has not been particularly good, and then Matt Boyd coming off of the IL, in which there was an opportunity for guys that weren't as sharp to really kind of pound on those guys, and they just didn't do it. Boyd's debut, only 1 run. Alex Cobb, the Cubs only got 1 run. They scored versus Ben Lively, but even Naga wasn't sharp. So, a little bit of an issue when the pitching betrays you and the Cubs aren't scoring. It's really hard to win games. When they were winning, when they went on their little win streak, when they took 3 of 4 from the Cardinals and immediately followed by taking, 2 of 3 from the Twins, they were slugging. They were in the top 10 in baseball at that time. They weren't striking out a lot, but their OBP dropped, which is something that I've noticed that, since the All-Star break, they're not walking as much. In aggregate, they're one of the top 10 teams in walks and, on base percentage, but that has really dipped, and it's not because of a huge climb in the strikeout rate. They're still not anywhere near one of the worst teams in strikeouts, but it seems like there might be a little bit of a game plan around being a little more aggressive, swinging more. Not sure what's going on there, but the Cubs really need to score runs to win games. 1 run is not going to take it. After the Guardians series, we saw the strikeouts really balloon, and batting average is dropping, and walks are staying significantly below the major league average. On the season, the offense is at a 97 weighted runs created plus, which is about 680 OPS, and 699 is the major league average right now at weighted runs created plus. But what would help? How could they fix this? Well, they need to get on base. Maybe they need to start taking more pitches and trying to walk. Obviously, the say a strike zone isn't helping him getting pitches, way outside the zone. And, being too selective has been an issue at times for this Cubs team, as they have not been able to generate, consecutive hits. So maybe a more consensus approach to walking. If you look at the top offenses in baseball, the top offenses in baseball is the Yankees. And it helps. You've got 2 superstars in that lineup at minimum at the top. You got Juan Soto and Aaron Judge, who are on base and slugging machines, which, hint, hint, one of those guys is a free agent. Please go get him, help this team. But those guys are helping that offense significantly. And, ultimately, when you're looking at that team, their on-base percentage is really high and their slug is high. So they're getting guys on base beyond just the batting average, which can have some randomness. And then once they're getting on base, they're slugging. So they're driving those runs in. So it seems a little traditional, it seems like an unsustainable offense, but the Cubs' batting average is low, their on-base percentage is dropping, and they're just not slugging nearly enough. So they need to fix one of those things. On-base might be the quickest path to that, and trying to get more traffic on the bases so that they can try to produce more runs. Number 2, the Cubs really, really, really need to figure out their bullpen. And guess what? They have. They've been so much better since July 4th, as Beth Mullins mentioned on the broadcast last night. They have blown saves, a lot of blown saves. They're in the top 5. But ironically, if you look, the Dodgers, who are in the first place in the West, have 22 blown saves, and they're leading the West. So blown saves aren't necessarily an indicator of a team being good or bad, but the Dodgers also have one of the top offenses, so they're scoring enough runs that when they are blowing the saves, it's in close games, but they're still blowing teams out and are still winning enough games that that's not affecting them. Now, when it comes to the playoffs, we'll see if that ends up being an issue for the Dodgers. And it also helps, that they have 3 perennial all-stars kind of anchoring that lineup in Mookie Betts, Shohei Ohtani, and Freddie Freeman. But since July 1st, the Cubs' bullpen has been 5th in WAR. And it's really been led by their Jorge Lopez acquisition, Porter Hodge, and even Hector Neris. Hector Neris has a 1.48 ERA in his appearances, hasn't given up a home run, is at 13 strikeouts and 12.1 innings. Yes, his saves are terrifying. They make me ill. And I have a hard time watching them sometimes. They make me want to spew.
If you're gonna spew into this.
But he has been effective, which is probably why he's still getting to go out there. The numbers are, solid, but he's still walking guys, and there's still too many hits. But the strikeout rate is there when the splitter is working. So until he kind of falls apart, I don't see him getting replaced from that role. But the bullpen has really stabilized, which has made this team better. Starting pitching has been good this year, too. Even with turnover, Jameson Taillon started the year hurt with a little back issue. Justin Steele got hurt in that first start of the year. The Cubs have been able to kind of weather the storm with guys like Brown and Assad and Jordan Wicks. Now, with Brown and Wicks still hurt, Wicks starting to pitch, he pitched for Iowa the other night. There have been tested on the depth, and luckily Kyle Hendricks has kind of turned his season around, has been an effective part of the rotation, because early in the year he was not that great, and Imanaga has been worth every penny. So the Cubs rotation, as long as it continues to be what it is and continues to produce, maybe Javier Assad can stop giving me heart attacks and putting a bunch of guys on just to strand them there, as it is his specialty. But ultimately, the starting rotation has been pretty solid, and they would be more solid if we go back to number 1, the Cubs score runs. And the last one, number 3, on how the Cubs can make the playoffs, just win. Obviously, there's a lot of things that are going to fall in their way. And Lance Brzezowski said on Marquee the other night that for the final 41 games, and this was prior to the last game versus the Guardians, they needed to go 28-13, which is about a .666 winning percentage. And they are playing the type of opponents that could help them achieve that. I mean, they have 10 of 13 of their remaining opponents are below 500. And they have the Yankees and the Dodgers and the Phillies mixed in there, who are pretty much cemented as being playoff teams. So there's an opportunity to play the Blue Jays, the Tigers, the Marlins, the Pirates, the Nationals, the Pirates again, the Rockies, the A's, the Nationals, Phillies, and the Reds. So there is a lot of opportunity for this team to kind of stack up some wins as they're playing the opponents that are going to help them. Now, I'm not saying the schedule is easy. It's easier than other teams. You still have to win ball games. So the task is in front of them. They're in control of their destiny. And we'll talk on another podcast about what this team would look like in the playoffs, how they would deploy their team, and how successful they could be. But hey, stranger things has happened. Just get in and see what happens. Get into the tournament and see what happens. And maybe we can turn around how we feel about this season. What do you think? What are the things that you think the Cubs need to do well to make the playoffs? What are the likelihood you think they'll make the playoffs? Leave some message in the comments if you're watching on YouTube, or come check us out on Twitter. Send me a DM, retweet the tweet from the podcast, and let me know what you're thinking about in the Cubs' chances to make the playoffs. Well, it wouldn't be a Bricks Behind the Ivy episode if we didn't get a visit from our guy, Harry Caray. He has another Deep Thoughts with Harry Caray. Come check it out.
Holy cow! Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to Deep Thoughts with your buddy, your old pal, Harry. I'm back with another deep thought on this Cubs season. Boy, oh boy, I had to come out here and visit my guys out here in DeKalb, Illinois, hop on the ambulance to get my blood pressure taken, because I don't know if this team's going to give me another grabber, but boy, oh boy, oh boy, it's been a long season and we still got a little ways to go, but here we go with some more deep thoughts. I know I got some guys running some stuff in the booth, but before we get to that, this time our shout out's going to be going back to all those youngsters out there, young and old, that are going back to school to go ahead and learn and smart and all that stuff. Good luck to you this school year, but a special shout out goes to one of our kids that works in the booth every day, Nick Erickson, who's going down to the University of Georgia. Hey, go dog! Thank you for all that you do for our stats and for all you do. Boy, oh boy, I got to make sure that keep up with these young kids who are drinking a Red Bull. Hey, Nick, this Red Bull's for you. Ooh, boy, oh boy. But let's talk a little bit of Cubs, shall we? You know, first of all, welcome Isaac Paredes, to the ball club. Kid's been pretty good. I kind of find it funny. Isaac's last name spelled backwards is City Rap. Time to get jiggy with it. Anyway, the guy's made a great impact on the ball club so far this year. It's a good spark that we might need. It's something that we need to kind of get going a little bit. There has been some bright spots. Boy, the hair's blowing in the breeze, whatever, but there's been some bright spots in the ball club. Happy's starting to throw, maybe the coffee's starting to kick in a little bit, belly's starting to hit just a skosh, but I tell you, that rotation, the top three with old Shoda Konnichiwa and old Justin Steele and Tyon, those three have been the anchors of this ball club this year so far, holding us. We got to find some offense. I mean, sometimes I wonder if these guys could hit water if they fell out of a friggin' boat. But, we got to be positive every single day. We still got some guys dinged up on the old DL. Now we got Wisniewski on the DL, and we got the new guy, Thomas Nido, is on the DL right now. But, got to get healthy. Hopefully we got Colton Brewer. Boy, oh boy, that guy's going to be throwing a rehab stint. Let's get that guy fixed, bring him up. Let's start chucking some baseballs out there at the old ball yard. Let's see what happens there, but... we've lost over 20-some games. I believe it's 29. I don't know. Nick's gone, so I'm on my own running stats. But 29-some one-run games that we've lost. Can't have it. Can't do it. But we've got to get back into all of these things. We just got done with a rough 3-game set against the Guardians. Oh, boy, that was brutal. That'll make me take another sip of the Red Bull. I got to get going. But, hey, Cubbies are back home. We got the old Blue Jays and the Detroit Tigers coming back, Hopefully we can get some wins thrown together. We may have Owen Casey coming up in September. Might move Saya to permanent DH. Who the heck knows? You got to stay positive, Cub fans. So hey, for all of us back home at the Wrigley Fire and Bar and Grill, hopefully my blood pressure is going to be a little better. This is Harry. So long, everybody.
Man, we are so lucky to have Pat Erickson and him being able to bring Harry Caray for us. Just another great segment. Hey, if you see his account, if you see Wrigley Fire Bar and Grill, go give them a like. Check them out. Check him out on Instagram at Cubs23. He's a great follow. He's a great guy. Love what he brings to the podcast. So I wanted to talk about the playoff chances and thoughts on the Cubs teams with another Cub person that I know, Jacob Zanolla. He is the writer and founder of the website The Ivy League, which talks about the Cubs, and he has the Stuck in the Ivy podcast as well, along with being a co-worker over at Northside Baseball. So Jacob has some thoughts on how the team might make the playoffs, and we get a little bit about his Cubs story. Check this out. All right, Cub fans, continuing with our theme about the Cubs very desperate push for a potential playoff spot. I'm joined today by Jacob Zanolla of the Ivy League, Cubs blog. Jacob, thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course, it's wonderful to be here. I like your Ivy background, and you got all the Cubs merch that the world can offer.
Yeah, and somehow it's still not enough unless you're my wife who thinks it's enough.
It happens.
Exactly. Yeah, this is for those who've been watching for a while and those who have watched on YouTube. It's not some artistic background. This is the inside of my house. This is the Candid Cub Cave, which is a perfect podcast studio for a Cubs podcast. But yeah, Jacob, you're joining me today. We're going to kind of talk about our thoughts on the Cubs' push for a playoff spot, what we think the likelihood of those things is going to happen. And a tradition for Brooks Behind the Ivy guests is we kind of ask, what's your Cubs story? So how did you get into the Cubs? How did you start following the Cubs? And tell us a little bit about how you started Ivy League.
So my dad grew up on the south side in Burbank, Illinois. And so he grew up there actually as a Cubs fan. I don't remember exactly why they didn't choose the White Sox. I'm very glad they didn't. But so yeah, then he was a Cubs fan, and then we moved down south to Midwestern Illinois, and that's where I live now. I was actually a Dodgers fan for the first year or two of following baseball, just because just getting into baseball, I loved Clayton Kershaw, him, and then Matt Kemp. Matt Kemp was another one that I really liked. And then once I started to actually understand the sport, probably around 2013 or so I would have been 8 years old. Is when I moved to the Cubs, and then ever since then, my deep analysis of the Cubs started in about 2022, but I really started learning more in 2020 during the pandemic, and so I really just went full on from there. And then, it was back. Man, it was back probably in January that I was talking with a friend. We were playing Fortnite late at night, and I just was like, "Hey, do you want to start a blog?" And he was like, "Yeah, why not?" We were both tired. We weren't thinking straight. And then the next morning I woke up and was like, that's actually a good idea. And we did. And ever since then that's also helped my podcast grow. Since then, I've also joined another blog, which is how I met you. And so now we got a whole mini baseball empire that's growing by the day.
Yeah, just so folks know that Jacob and I both are contributors over at Northside Baseball, and go check out their content. A little plug for Matt Trueblood and the gang over there. Thanks for taking us on and letting us grow our Cub connections and leading to opportunities like this where we can kind of talk about the Cubs and, figure out how to fix the team. Because if it's not us, then who's going to fix it, right? So,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, yeah, the 2024 Cubs are a conundrum. We're not going to kind of dig into too much of the things that everybody's talking about, the runners in scoring position, the bullpen, the lack of a true closer, blown saves. But the Cubs are in an interesting opportunity that, got a little trickier after the sweep in Cleveland this week to really stack some wins against some opponents and potentially chase a playoff spot. What are your thoughts about, the likelihood of that happening? If you had to rate it on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being very likely or possible and 1 being impossible, what are your thoughts on the Cubs being able to do this, and what's your rating?
I would say the chances we make the playoffs are about 6%, 10 if I'm really nice, which I'm not, so 6%. And it's been such a frustrating season. And my main takeaway from this season is that these problems we knew would happen. Most of them we knew would happen, and they were solvable. They were fixable. But I believe one executive GM said once, they said the White Sox are a mid-market team that acts like a small market team, and the Cubs are a large market team that acts like a mid-market team. It's all upstairs. It really is. I think I don't know how we can make the playoffs. Taking 1 of 3 from Cleveland would have been fine because, like you said, we have such an easy schedule coming up. But even now, we would have to just destroy everybody to even make the playoffs an afterthought.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I think I would probably put it, on the 1 to 5. I'm going to put it on a 1.5.
And generally, I would say 1.
Yeah, the Cubs, like I tend to be, I don't know, empathetic will be the word. Optimistic's not the correct word. That's Sean Chapin's job. He's the optimistic Cub fan. But, I think, they do have an opportunity. Like it's not, the door's not shut, but no tiebreakers really for the teams above them makes it additionally challenging. They're not playing any of the teams that are above them is going to make that additionally challenging. And, they're going to have to play at a 666% winning percentage down the stretch to really give themselves a shot. And it's not even a guarantee. So
Right.
it's looking like another season in which the Cubs are not a playoff team. And, I think we're up to 7 years without a win in the playoffs for the Cubs. And it is interesting, as a fan of a different generation than you, to think, like to balance the idea of the success of 2016 and the multiple playoff appearances in the period after that, and this, challenging, we'll call it a challenging moment of trying to, as Jed calls, thread the needle. What is your perspective as, a newer Cub fan to this space? What is your perspective of how the team is achieving their goals, not achieving their goals? Do you think that the fan base is getting, itchy? Do you think 2016 is enough for some fans? What are your thoughts there?
I think they're restless. I think the fans are restless. And I think they had everyone said, just give me one World Series. And after you won in 2016, they're like, okay, how about one more? And the Cubs have not, it's not that, oh, I'm sorry we haven't won the World Series. We've at least been making the playoffs consistently. They don't even know how to make the playoffs anymore. And it's just, they're settling for mediocrity every year. And there is no push to make this team any better because as long as Ricketts makes the money, it doesn't really matter to him if we win or not. Last year in Milwaukee, the last series of the year, Ron Coomer said, that's the most frustrated I've ever seen Tom Ricketts. Okay, cool. What are you going to do about it? I mean, we got Michael Bush. We got Imanaga. That's it. I don't know how much we're really going to be able to do with a weak free agent class this offseason because we know we're not signing Juan Soto. I mean, should we? Yes. Will we? No. We'll get Anthony Santander and be okay with it. And that's a good player. But that's the problem that a team of this caliber should be paying Juan Soto and be able to convince him, hey, look at how we've been in the playoffs the last few years. Oh, wait, we haven't. There's not that pull to Chicago, and so we're just in a rut. And then you have our farm system. Yeah, we have great prospects, but after AAA, we got no one. And so it's going to be, this offseason will be extremely important to turn around this fan base and turn around this whole franchise. Because after 2016, which obviously was our first World Series in any of our lifetime, I was only 10. So I was very lucky to see one early in my life. And then ever since then, it's just been, I mean, that was supposed to be a dynasty. That was supposed to be, sure, they're going to win too. But the conversation was 3 or 4. Like this was an incredible team, like just firing on all cylinders. I get you're not going to have every player exceeding their value in 1 year often. That happened in 2016. And ever since then, it hasn't happened. And the front office and management hasn't made the moves necessary to put a Band-Aid over those holes to fix it, to try and at least get us to the playoffs where anything can happen.
Yeah, I think I would argue, Jed did do a solid job of making decisions of, kind of cutting loose of the nostalgic factor of the core.
Yes, he did.
He did get return, for Rizzo and Bryant and Baez and such that, has, restocked a farm system. But yeah, depending on the ranking, as re-rankings are coming out this week from MLB Pipeline and others, the Cubs are sliding down for exactly what you said. They're very top heavy, and even their top heavy isn't like top heavy. It's,
Right.
top 100 prospects, but we're not sitting on Chris Bryant. We're not sitting on this guy that's, a middle of the order plug that's going to, change the dynamics of this lineup. So they're in an interesting position. I think I agree with you. It's a very, very important offseason. I think they either need to use the cupboard, the top end of this cupboard to address the issues on this roster, or, they need to pony up the dough and give Juan Soto a blank check and one hell of a sales pitch. And, I think the middle ground of that is what has been happening. Of this thread the needle. It's the buzzword. It's the hashtag Jed Hoyer, hashtag thread the needle. It's the trending phrase that he uses. But threading the needle is extremely difficult. It's I think you look at kind of the Texas Rangers as an interesting case study. Like, they didn't really thread the needle. They were building their farm system and then throwing ludicrous money at players, and they're not doing well this year. They're no sugarcoating it, but they had all the front end pitching they acquired get hurt, and Jacob deGrom, we could kind of predict that, and Max Scherzer obviously being hurt, and they just haven't been able to kind of stack together wins as other guys have gotten hurt. But yeah, they put in a top payroll. They've got guys in that lineup that people fear. And that's probably the biggest issue with this Cubs lineup is, unless everybody's kind of on a heater, there's not a guy that's going to like carry them when other guys are low. And I think, bringing back Bellinger this year was the hope that he was that guy from the second half, but health and other things have kind of prevented him from, really getting locked in. And it's a very challenging picture. And so one thing that Jed did differently at this deadline that I'll commend him for is trading Christopher Morel. And I thought, that he was untouchable given his propensity to not want to trade players, I feel, that, are at the sell low and, as you call it, prospect hugging. So I'm hoping that's kind of an indicator this offseason that, they'll look at moving some of these prospects. And especially while they still have like that high ranking, that high pedigree in baseball ranking lists, and before some of them make it to the majors, I think there is potentially an argument that it would be a disservice to have them come up here because this enigma or the little shiny toy that nobody really knows how they're going to be in the majors, like it's erased by small sample sizes and long commentary. And I would assume front offices are smarter than that, but the Twitter vacuum sometimes. Look at PCA last year and his extremely small sample size, and people are like, this guy's a bust. Yeah. And obviously, he wasn't coming out in gangbusters this year, but he's really starting to find a stride, and his numbers have been pretty positive and, since the beginning of August, and looks like he's kind of tapped into something, and his speed is a game changer, and just being an average bat with his glove is so positive. But yeah, I think it would be potentially a disservice to the value of these players to have them have small sample sizes of potential failure in the majors if you're planning to move them. But there's also, if there are certain players that you really think you're going to want to keep, Owen Casey likely, as 670 score kind of talked about him being likely call up. He's got to be put on the 40-man anyway. So getting him a cup of coffee and trying to find things he can work on is a very solid idea. But like Matt Shaw, Moises Ballesteros, guys like that, barring injury, I just don't think we're going to see, which is something that, friend of the pod, Cubs on Deck, talk about this week about potential ETA for the top prospects at Iowa. And I implore you to check that out. It's a really good episode about, the individual prospects. But, I think that's a good place to leave it as we sit on hope that this season has a little more meaning. And, I think it would feel appropriate to kind of go on a run to just miss, because that is, I feel like, would be probably the most frustrating thing for the fan base. And there's just been easily so many things that have made times this year tough. So, Jay, where can people find you on socials? Where can they find Ivy League, and where can they find your podcast?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter at Jacob Zanolla. Odds are you've probably seen me trolling someone or posting baseball news. I do a little bit of both. But yeah, so on Twitter at Jacob Zanolla. I'm on Twitter on the podcast at Stuck in Ivy Pod. That's our Twitter and Instagram, Stuck in the Ivy Podcast on Spotify and Apple. And then Ivy League Cubs on all socials and ivyleaguecubs.com. And then obviously Northside Baseball as well, that we both write for. But yeah, the Ivy League Cubs and Stuck in the Ivy are the two that those are my, my babies. Those are the ones that I've started to grow over the last few months.
Makes sense, as Bricks Behind the Ivy is also my baby. But thanks so much for joining us, Jacob. Go check out his content and give him a follow, a like, just like our podcast. Give him a review, help him get some reach. Thank you so much for your time today.
Of course.
Well, thank you for joining us for another episode of Bricks Behind the Ivy. If you liked what you saw, make sure you pound that subscribe button, share this with all your friends. If you're listening on the audio, wherever you are, Apple Pods or Spotify, make sure to subscribe and review this podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and I would be so sad if I didn't mention the world's greatest sponsor, Wrigleyville Sports. Wrigleyville Sports is a family-owned and run business since 1990, adjacent to Wrigley Field, with the best Cubs merch in town. Go check them out before a game, after a game. They're known for their quick custom jerseys. Go in there, get a custom jersey ordered, and then have it ready for the game. You can pick it up, you can go on their website, but hey, if you like saving on things and you like Cub stuff, or you like Chicago sports team stuff, because they have that too, check out our discount code. Use code IVY10 at checkout for 10% savings. Yes, that code is IVY10. So thanks so much for being a sponsor, Wrigleyville Sports. And thank you guys, Brickheads, for continuing to follow this podcast. If you liked the podcast and you want to show your pride, check out our Etsy store. Yes, there's a link in the bio for Bricks Behind the Ivy swag. We've got tank tops, we've got coffee mugs, we've got it all. We've got t-shirts, polo shirts, zips. As it gets colder, we have blankets. Curl under a Brickhead blanket today and check it out. All those proceeds do go to the podcast and help us make more excellent content. Until next time, go Cubs. Let's rack some of those wins together. See you guys soon.